Hey everybody, today's episode is a little bit different. The script has been flipped, so they say. Carson Hall, the St. Louis University High senior, two-time state champion, lacrosse player, and all-around great kid, will be leading the conversation, interviewing me. Yes, that's right, the guest is now the host. He came into the conversation extremely prepared, as would be expected from a junior Bill, and we had a blast talking about the podcast, the why, where we are going with it, what's been our favorite conversations, what is the theme that resonates the most, and some more background dirt on myself. What was supposed to be a simple project for school immediately felt like a great episode. I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed sitting there with him. The future is bright, people, so let's go. Here's Carson Hall interviewing yours truly.
All right, you have a red light. The floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Thank you for tuning into my podcast. I'm your host, Carson Hall, and I'm here with JB Anderson, aka the Soccer Dad Pod. Thank you for coming on the show.
No problem, man. It's I think that's the first time I've been called aka the Soccer Dad, so I appreciate that.
Of course. Just tell me about yourself. What are your hobbies and interests outside of podcasting and soccer?
So two parts to that question. First part, tell you about myself. I am ripe old age of 50. I have 3 boys. One's in college, junior in college. The other one's junior in high school. And then I have a 6th grader. I have 2 cats that neither one of them like me. And my hobbies, second part of the question, if I had to choose a hobby to do outside of doing this or watching soccer, kind of the predictable things, I would be fishing. I would fish 7 days a week. That's my jam.
You thinking like deep sea or lake?
Yeah, no, I grew up fishing what I would call like ponds, rivers, lakes, bass or crappie, etc. And then about 15 years ago, went on a trip down to the Keys and decided to try deep sea. And I'll never forget it because the first captain that we met was like, he's, hey, you have any experience fishing, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, yeah, we're from the Ozarks, Table Rock. And he kind of laughed. He goes, well, on this boat, we don't fish. We bend rods. And I was hooked. I'm like, bend rods? And it didn't make sense until we hooked into something that bent our rods. And I'm like, oh, my God. The adrenaline has never left.
For sure. Tell me a little bit about yourself when you were my age. What was Granite City High School JV like?
Granite City High JB. I, too, played soccer. That's all I played. I would like to believe I was a multi-sport athlete, but I wasn't. I loved soccer and, played it year-round. I was lucky because Granite City at that time, we were, I'll brag a little bit, we were a powerhouse. We were, 2 of my 4 years, we won state championships. And growing up in the shadow of the arch, but growing up in Illinois, a lot of St. Louis soccer people never really took us seriously, even though we played them all, SLU, CBC, Vianney, DeSmet. And they always forgot that whenever we went to win state, still hold the record for most state titles in Illinois, Granite City does, it wasn't like we were playing Farmers down in Carbondale. We had to go to Chicago and play very, very big schools that were very, very good. So high school me, that was my focus. And, going to a public school and living in kind of an old school steel town, when I wasn't playing soccer, we were going to the ice rink or we were, trying to sneak into movies, just typical. Do you watch Stranger Things?
I watched the first couple seasons and then I stopped and I just haven't caught back up yet.
So those kids, that was us. That was what we did. I'm dating myself here, so.
It's awesome. What inspired you to start the Soccer Dad Pod?
So a couple of different factors kind of all smashed together at the same time. At the time, I owned a recording studio. So from a production standpoint, I had experience, I had gear in recording. Most of it was music-based. Very few podcasts at the time. In podcasts, I was interested in podcasts, but not excessively. So I had that skill set, and then obviously loving the game and having kids that played it. You know my son Beckett. You guys played together, right? And then two of the other dads on the particular team at the time in which we started the show, they also had free time as we're waiting around trainings, 5 days a week. And, we'd be standing on the fence talking about soccer nonstop. And I jokingly said, well, this is stupid to waste all of these brilliant ideas and takes. Let's start a podcast. And I jokingly was like, Soccer Dad Pod, let's make it super cliche. And 3 years later, we're still doing it. So that's how it came about.
Yeah, that's great. I still remember listening to the first episode on the way to soccer park with my mom.
Sorry about that. Sorry, Jeannie.
But kind of going off that, how do you find that the content of your podcast has been changing over time?
That's a great question, because to kind of understand how we manage the content or the theme, I need to talk about the why. We had a fundamental agreement when we started the show that there wasn't going to be any pressure, that we were only going to do it if it was easy, and then we were going to only do it if it was fun, and if it stayed fun and easy, we would just keep doing it and let it be what it is. But we didn't know what direction we were going to go from a content standpoint. We knew that we were going to talk about soccer, and being in St. Louis, if you want to talk about soccer, and if you want to find anybody to talk about soccer with, that's pretty easy because there's so many legends in town. The saying "they walk among us." That became the easy part, was to have the conversations. Now, to your question, the kind of how the themes have morphed, what we found is that having guests on or talking about subject matter that is relevant to a majority of listeners. And what I mean by that is we know who's listening. We know that it's parents just like me, just like your parents, that are in that age range, or maybe they have young kids that are coming up, and they're all trying to figure out how to help their child. So when we started seeing, or when we started having guests on that were like high school coaches or college coaches in particular, asking the questions about tell us about your program, tell us about who you recruit, how do you recruit, what kind of players are you looking for? There was information there that became very valuable to a group of people that were like, I want my child to make it to the next level. So strategically, we've decided that we want to stay in a kind of a pendulum of content where the college pathway is really desirable, and we know we get a lot of downloads. But then it's always fun to go and talk to a Tab Ramos or a Tim Ream or some of these legends of the game that are playing or have played, because all the older people that have had kids a long time ago but love the game, they want to hear those stories. So that's how we kind of manage the content.
Yeah, that's great. Your bio on Instagram states a podcast loaded with top flight guests hosted by mid-table hosts. So I think that's kind of touching on the no stress factor, but what would you describe as a mid-table host?
The name of the show, Soccer Dad Pod, was intended to be cliche, because it was a play on words, right? If you take soccer out and you just talk about Dad Pod, that sounds a lot like Dad Bod, right? Some middle-aged, a little bit of a beer belly, suburban dad in, old school white New Balances. So adding Soccer Dad Pod to it just kind of gave the theme, everybody knows what we're going to talk about. But the mid-table host was, again, another attempt at being self-deprecating. Because I think in a lot of content, I'm not going to say entertainment, but in content, people are drawn to individuals that are approachable, right? That are kind of funny, that are willing to make fun of themselves, right? And be cognizant that they're just good people, but they don't have to be great. So by saying, we want to, top flight guests interviewed by mid-table dads, it was really kind of like making it clear we're doing this for fun. Yes, we, knock on wood, we do know quite a bit about it at this point. I mean, we're at 300 plus conversations, but we're not taking ourselves too seriously.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of going off your comment about Tim Ream and people who are like incredibly cool to talk to. What is one specific interview that kind of altered your perspective on St. Louis soccer or United States soccer as a whole?
The easy answer that comes to mind first, and frankly, there's a lot of conversations that have really made me feel prideful to be a St. Louis and involved in soccer. But it was when talking with Tab Ramos, U.S. Soccer Hall of Famer, probably one of the top 3-4 players all time in U.S. men's soccer history. He was kind enough to join us not once but twice, and in both conversations there was themes that were brought up about St. Louis, and not really prompted by us. He was the one that talked about in the early days and playing at Soccer Park when they were World Cup qualifiers for the '90 World Cup and things like that. And he told a story one time about because he's I believe he's from Ecuador. I might have that wrong, but anyway, his family was moving and they were coming to the States. The dad was coming to get a job. The dad was going to work in industry, but he wanted his son to play soccer. That was their passion, and the dad had done his homework. And so when they were moving, the dad told the family, look, there's only 2 cities that we can choose from. And it's either going to be New Jersey, Kearney, New Jersey, or St. Louis, Missouri. And then when he was telling this story and then all the names, because he ripped off a load of names that we know that are from St. Louis that he played with or for or against, he closed it out with saying, the thing about Soccer Park for us in the day, that was our Azteca. So, the Mexican national team, they play in Azteca Stadium, which is 100,000 people. That's their capital. And for U.S. soccer in those days, to a guy that I view as one of the greatest ever, for him to say Soccer Park was our Azteca just made me feel great.
Yeah, I 100% agree with him. There's no place on earth like...
Well, because you guys have played on that field too.
Yeah.
So I was actually thinking about this a little while back. Like your state championship game, you win state on Soccer Park Field 1. This is the same field that a Tab Ramos says, that was my Azteca. Some of the most important games in his life occurred on the same field that you played on.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Hey, we're doing our friends over at PCDA solid today. If you're a family with a baller who's wanting to play beyond high school, who's maybe in a rut trying to figure out what to do, where to go, how to get there, take a second and go check out PCDA. Pre-College Development Academy is a gap year program where players can utilize the facilities, the coaching, the training, the league, the education component, competition, and the time to better prepare. Bottom line, with the college game largely getting significantly bigger, older, faster, and stronger, it might make sense to explore alternatives and use the time as an ally. Go to www.precollegeda.com for more information.
Kind of shifting to where your channel's going, where do you feel, or where do you want your channel to be in 5 years? And kind of going off of that, who is your dream person to interview and why?
That's a great question. The first part, as far as where do I want it to go? I have a hard time now trying to keep my own personal mantra of do it if it's fun, do it if it's easy, because I've kind of created a little bit of a beast. It's grown. We are, thousands and thousands of subscribers and followers, and me personally, I haven't monetized it. I haven't gone out. I haven't got sponsors because once you do that, you then have a defined business because there's a transaction. However, I do think there's an opportunity to grow the show even more. And I purposely chose the name Soccer Dad Pod without throwing in St. Louis Soccer Dad or any of that, because I didn't want to tie it down to just this city, because in the back of my head, the dream was, okay, if this thing blows up, it could be nationally relevant, it could be big, and it could expand. And therefore, I don't want people in LA or Phoenix or New York to not be able to, for me to not be able to grow it there because it's STL Soccer Dad, right? So to answer your question, in 3-5 years, I probably will start working on turning it into a fun business, because it's one of those things. You can't just come out of the gate with content and say, oh, I'm going to go get a sponsor and start a podcast. It doesn't work that way. You have to build the podcast, figure out who's listening, and then go to try and turn it into a business that still services the listeners.
Yeah, as a follower, I've sensed like a little bit of a drift to like a national level with all the U.S. men's national team interviews and college soccer. So I thought that was a great answer.
Well, I tell you what, I mean, this would interest you probably, maybe, I don't know. Because the data that I get on the backside, as far as downloads and subscribers, et cetera, there's a layer of the data that shows me where these people are. And earlier in 2025, there was a tipping point in which, if we looked at the total number of downloads and subscribers, we ended up being a minority of our listeners, less than 50% are from the St. Louis area. So right now we're roughly 40% of all of our listeners are from the St. Louis metropolitan area, which, simply put, that means 58% are not from here. They're from Kansas City. They're from Chicago, which I find funny because Kansas City's like in the top 3, and all I do is troll them. So it's grown. So I going back to your question, I see those numbers. Therefore, I'm starting to react to what the market is telling me. I'm not telling the market anything. I'm telling our stories. So I'm letting it tell me where I can and can't grow.
Yeah. On the contrary of the national level, you interview a lot of local soccer players each week, both girls and boys. How do you find those interviews through the STL Best XI, like changing your perspective on high school soccer, which is not necessarily something you went through as a father?
Well, it's funny because so there's a couple things going on there. I'll give you the boring part of the answer first, because when you do create content, or if you're in media, a lot of times there are different parts of the content that are compartmentalized. And what I mean by that simply is Soccer Dad Pod has an episode or episodes, and that's roughly an hour long. Those are the podcasts. But I knew that we could go to market with snippets, smaller stuff, real content, right? And you earlier in the conversation, you asked me about Granite City and high school soccer and all those things. I mean, it was the greatest time of my life. So working with Dave Ehrenberg, the coach over at Ladue, in putting together the St. Louis Best 11 and doing the featured players, doing the team of the week, kind of took me back to my roots, right? I loved it. I love having those conversations because there's a certain amount of innocence. I hate that, it sounds kind of cheesy, but there's a lot of, there's innocence in those conversations that is real. And the people that listen to those conversations or those interviews or look at the content, they feel connected to the platform, to the kids. I mean, for example, like when I interviewed you, I was getting text messages from other parents that were, from the team that we all grew up with. They were like, "Oh my God, that was awesome, Carson. It was great." And it's fun. I like shining a spotlight on kids that are standing out. It's fun. So
yeah. The interview you did with me was a blast. And you've interviewed 4 other SLU players, I believe, over the past 2 years through STL Best XI. But where do you see those interviews going in the future? Maybe into like a platform for recruiting, or like player rankings, or even like a seeding, like a tournament similar to the Champions League?
I think there's a lot of opportunity for that content to take on a life of its own, to be a benefit for the kids, for the programs. Back in the day, and even not too long ago, a team of the week or the featured player of the week was really kind of a newspaper thing. And you know better than anybody, right? Who's reading a newspaper, right? It's just not happening. The new platform is an Instagram, is a TikTok. So I think it's going to grow because more and more people are becoming aware of it. The numbers are really crazy because I think, like you guys, maybe the question is to you, because I find it amazing, fascinating to me, because we finally got to the point where we were consistent. Wednesdays at 3:00, we were going to release that team. And at about 2:50 on Wednesdays, I would get a text from Beckett saying, "Who's on the team this week?" Trying to get ahead of it. And then all of a sudden, within hours, you see hundreds and hundreds of likes, and the views, the impressions are exceeding 100,000 views at a time, and it just felt good because I saw the trash talk. I saw, it just kind of elevated the game. And I think for me, those programs, those platforms, help high school soccer, because high school soccer was kind of taking it on the chin because of academy and everything else. And and I would tell the high school coaches I know, like, quit complaining about academy, fight harder. And I think a platform like that helped fight. So to your question, though, about how does it help kids or how can it, I know firsthand. I know for a fact. I know a lot of college coaches at this point, through the show and otherwise. They see that. They know that, if a kid is constantly on that team, does it mean that they're going to recruit them? No. Does it mean that they're aware of them? Yes. And that's a bonus. So I think, like, figuring out how to bottle that could be a really incredible asset, not only for the programs, but really for the kids to open doors that maybe wouldn't have been open previously.
Yeah, going on your point about trash talk, I remember from the fall walking through the halls, and we'd be like, "Oh, how was that guy on the best 11 this week? He stinks." So I think it definitely increased a sense of, like, competitiveness that high school soccer needed, and just like a drive or motivator for high school soccer.
Well, let me tell you a quick funny story about that, if it's all right with you. This is your show. Sorry,
Yeah.
habit. Probably my favorite interview. No offense to you, you're not my favorite interview. You're top 5. I'll give you top 5.
All right, thanks.
Was the goalie from Carlisle, Illinois. So, as you well know, the best 11 it's the whole region, including Illinois teams. And it's really up to the high school coaches. So whenever schools complain or parents complain or kids complain that nobody from their team is on there, the majority of the time, that's on the coach. So that's my disclaimer first off. So the Carlisle goalie comes on, and I looked into him real quick, and by his senior year, multi-sport athlete, Carlisle, Illinois. It's a co-ed program, but he had just surpassed Illinois state records for saves and shots against and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's pretty crazy. I would never have thought of that, right? Or assumed. So I asked him the question. I'm like, Carlisle, Illinois, no offense, but you guys really aren't a soccer powerhouse, but your name is officially in the record books. You are now kind of the number 1 shot stopper in Illinois high school soccer history. How do you feel about that? Or, how does that make you feel? And his answer was so simplistic. He was like, well, we've really only had kind of bad defenses. and that answer was kind of why I have these conversations, because it was just endearing. Because it was just honest. Kids are honest. And that was one of those moments where I'm like, I got to keep doing this.
Yeah. I love watching it every week. Now kind of shifting into your role as a dad, mm-hmm. Where do you find the most joy in being a father? Maybe on the field, through concerts, anywhere in between?
I think it's a combination of all of that. Because it's one of those things. I mean, there's a ton of cliche sayings when it comes to parenting. All parents want their kids to do better than they did, and all parents want their kids to find love and be safe and have great friends. But I think at the end of the day, for me, what gives me pride is I just want to see my kids put out effort, work hard at what they believe in, what they love, and make sure that they bring other people along with them. And I think that my kids, what gives me pride is whether it's, my oldest in a band or people he's making music with, or, Beckett on the field and the bench and in the locker room, and the people that are loyal to him and friends. Like, I see that they are good people. My youngest is very empathetic. He, as soon as snow starts falling, he grabs the shovel and he's next door for our senior aged neighbors, making sure the Harlans are all right, and he refuses the money until they force it in his pocket, right? That's what makes me proud as a parent, because I think to be good in business or to be good in sales or to be good at soccer or to be good at music or any of those things, there's a large degree of just trial and error, practice, effort that is kind of mechanically moldable, or you can improve over time. But to be a good person, especially in today's world, that's rare. And I think that's what makes me most proud.
Yeah, that's awesome. Kind of going along Beckett on the soccer field, if you could go back to day one, what would you tell yourself about the recruiting process and player development as a whole, particularly from the perspective of a father?
Overvalue grades. And I say that not to be like, well, you're not going to be a pro, so be prepared for the real world. I say it because it's if you really want to be an elevated soccer player, if you want to go to college, if you want to play at the next level, just logistically, the landscape is going to require really good grades. So if you want to be a kid that's going to an ACC school or a Big East school or any Big Ten school, you can't go if you don't have good grades. So there's that. And then there's the financial reality of the situation. If you have good grades, if you're coming out of SLU High with a 3.75 or above, ideally a 4.0, right? Well, college coaches, and they tell me this firsthand, when they look at a player and they look at the GPA, they view the GPA as partial scholarship. So that's part of the equation automatically. But then there's the intangible of, if you love the game and you want to get to the next level, you have to be very disciplined. And if you're only disciplined in the sport, working out or getting your touches or going to training or whatever, but you're not very disciplined in the other aspects of your life, at some point you'll stumble in discipline when it matters most on the field. So kind of teaching the body, teaching the brain, teaching the habits to be consistent is what, if I could go back, because I was a good student, I wasn't a great student, and I think because I found a way to test really well, it kind of, I cheated myself, and if I'm being honest with myself, I did the same thing as a player at times. Yeah, I didn't eat healthy enough, or I didn't stretch enough, or I didn't take an ice bath or whatever. I didn't do the extra stuff, which would be equatable to reading an extra chapter at night or doing a little bit more math. There's a correlation there.
Yeah, well, I think you've done a great job with Beckett, because I still remember him posting either like him eating healthy on his story or going for a run before school and tagging all these different soccer players, teams. That was inspiring for me as a teammate.
Well, I'll tell you, because this is a parenting thing, because you know Beckett really well, right? You've watched it, you've seen it. 98% of everything that you've seen in the posts and even on the field or on the bench or in the locker room, that's him, right? I haven't had to, because there's a lot of helicopter parents that, especially parents that used to play, and they'll tell you, oh, I played high school soccer, or I played college soccer, and I know what I'm talking about, or I watched the EPL on Saturday mornings, so that qualifies me. And, yes, I know the game. Yes, I played the game. Yes, I know a lot of people that know a lot about the game, and I have these conversations, et cetera. but I leave the runway open for him to make his decisions. So when he was waking up, in junior high at 5:30, 6 in the morning to go run, before school, I didn't ask him to. I didn't ask him about it. I didn't tell him, the next day if he didn't, hey, why aren't you? And I think like that's just to brag on him a second. Everybody that elevates to the next level has to find that thing that motivates them to do the extra. And players like yourself, Cole, right, Chambers, right. There are certain things that individuals do that it's because they love it, and no parent can make them do that.
Yeah, Cole especially would do like his arm workouts before soccer, and
Right.
it's just like the next level of discipline that has gotten him to the next level. For you, what has been the hardest part about like the recruitment process as a parent? I know Beckett just finally is back from injury, but like touch on that a little bit.
I think it's the hardest part is really being honest with the process. Again, I think Beckett, going through it with him, because he's been lucky. And I say lucky because, a lot of times if a dream school, if a school is recruiting you, it requires luck. And what I mean by that is you could be the best center back in the world, but if said school that you want to go to has 3 center backs on the roster and they're all-stars at sophomores and juniors, you're not getting recruited. You're not going to go there because they just don't need it. So it requires timing and everything else. And I think because he's been communicating with some, amazing schools that are dream schools. The hard part in that process is watching him manage the weight, right? Because when kids today see their peers or players that they played against or with that are signing pro contracts at this age, not too long ago, and you know this, Julian Hall, right? New York Red Bulls. Mm-hmm. I mean, they played him twice. I think Beckett was on a Insta reel with the kid one day for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
There's these kids, yourselves, you guys are so close to greatness in other players, and on the daily, other kids that are the commitment pictures and going to different schools. So I think there's a lot of a brain attack as far as like, well, am I good enough? Why didn't they call me? And again, there's a lot of things to juggle. So the hard thing as a parent is being honest with the process and being okay with a school saying, look, we're not interested, doesn't fit our profile, and not taking it personally, because, oh, my kid's great. Are you kidding? I see who you signed. You got to avoid that, because that's a natural instinct of parents to defend their kids. And most of the time we love them, but we're really not being honest with ourselves. So getting to that point has been hard, but really kind of probably the most satisfying.
Even though I've kind of detached myself a little bit from the club soccer world, I still, like when I see the commitment post, I still feel a little bit like, what if I kind of stuck with it? So, I mean, someone who's still in that world, I can only imagine how he feels seeing those and all the comparisons with City 2 and whatnot.
And I think that, and you know this because you come from the club. When you have a club like Scott Gallagher, where you have a staff of the Gavin Cuddys of the world, or the Steve Tritschues of the world, or the Tim Leonards of the world, that truly are invested in you, right? That are interested in helping you because they like you, the process will work itself out, right? And some clubs, who shall not be named, they have different motive. They have different intentions. So my advice to any kid, if the dream is to play at the next level, make sure you are at a place in which you're playing, because if you're not playing or you're getting half the minutes, you're really not getting seen, doesn't matter how good you are. And make sure that the staff values you. Because if those two things don't exist, you want to talk about an uphill climb, good luck. Yeah, I was going to ask you though, because you're multi-sport, right? Lacrosse is now in season. When you see the commitments, what goes through your head?
I'd say it's just it's mixed emotions. Like, I'm proud of them because, like, when we played all together, but I kind of wonder, like, if I made the wrong decision by, like, kind of moving towards lacrosse, or, like, kind of not necessarily going to a lower level of soccer, but kind of going to a lower level of soccer just so I could balance two sports. But I think it's mostly just like proud of my old teammates, my old friends. I mean, they're still my friends today, but
Well, I can tell you this. I know for a fact a lot of the kids that have stayed in the academy landscape, when they look at their buddies, people like yourself, and they show up at Soccer Park in November and watch, 2,500 people stare at you guys win a state title, the jealousy is real. And it's not you looking into the bleachers or their Instagram account. It's them looking at you guys on the field lifting a trophy.
I still remember my first high school game against Chaminade at their grass field, and I was like, you can't find this anywhere in the club soccer world. So it's just a lot of pros and cons between the two.
It takes you have to, again, you asked what's hard for a parent. For me, it's being self-aware. And I think kids need to do the same thing. Like, what is important? Is it an experience like that? Or is it challenging yourself to chase a dream that is going to be very, very hard? So that's the end of my TED Talk.
Yeah. But this kind of goes off what we were just talking about in terms of, like, success in youth soccer for both boys and girls. Like, how do you think you can define success in a system that's all over the place with GA Cup, MLS Next 2, ECNL, high school soccer, recruitment, all these other factors?
That's a brilliant question. I mean, that is literally, answer that question. It's on par with curing cancer. Like, it's so difficult. But I think where I would start is, I wish there was more of a clear-cut leadership at the very, very tippy top. And whether that's U.S. soccer through the national team programs, going down and kind of creating at least a map of what they view as this is our ladder, right? Because to your point, and I think you know this better than anybody, it's not one ladder. There's some 4-foot ladders, some 12-foot ladders, and they're all over the board, and everybody's going to claim that the top of their ladder is the best, right? And we know, and right? You travel around. If you take a second-tier or third-tier team into other markets, St. Louis is a little bit of an anomaly because our second-best team or our third-best team, and often our fourth-best team, is better than most markets' first team, right? So we have this thing that kind of messes with our head. But I think there needs to be just a clear organization. Because if you look at, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, or whatever that saying is. If you want to improve the system, look at systems that work. You look at the FA in England, you look at the Bundesliga in Germany, or you look in any of those soccer nations. If you look at their top, you look at their national team, then you look at their pro league, and then you look at the second division and third division, and all the way down, it's all under one umbrella. We don't have that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that, we have chaos. So if I were to have the, king for a day, I would start there. And it'd be very, very hard because at the end of the day, these clubs make money. Yes, they're nonprofit, wink, wink. But there's a lot of money involved, and that's part of the problem. And I don't want to sound like, free for all, because nothing's free. I get that. But I think we need to create a system in which everybody can be honest with themselves, again, knowing that while you might be the top team in NAL or whatever the league is, to be clear, you are not the top talent, and we need to manage that expectation better. Yeah,
you kind of touched on a couple of questions I didn't even ask, which was nice.
Sorry, I talked too much.
No, it's great. I kind of wrote down, like, about club soccer and if it really focuses on the development of players, and also, like, kind of what matters more at 12 years old, like your skill or the environment you're in. And I think you touched on that. Gallagher does value the development of players, but as you've grown in this topic, you realize that that is not the case everywhere.
No, and this is the most fun topic that I discuss or debate with individuals, soccer people, is, and it comes down to high school versus academy, right? Is kind of the core, and I'm not going to name names, Coach Ehrenberg, but we have this conversation, and I do acquiesce to the reality that I think when kids play high school soccer in particular, when you step onto the field in preseason and you have that first game, right, and then you play a rival, that whole process, there's only one goal. That goal is to win state, right? When a kid plays academy soccer, roughly the same age, let's say they're junior or senior, right? Of course, all kids are competitive. They want to win, but what is their real goal? The real goal is to get to the next level. The real goal is to have a really good game themselves, right? And you can see environments, especially in showcases. When you look at showcases, and these teams travel around and they play 3 games, and there's no trophy, there's no winner's bracket. You don't move on. It's just showcases so people can see you. It's impossible not for these kids not to think about, I need to be good, right? Mm-hmm. Because a loss, as long as it's not a blowout, as long as you don't look awful, if you're the best player on a losing team, you could be the big winner in that game. And that's the difference.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. I definitely felt that kind of as I grew up, just with certain players, that individual performance.
Let me give you an example. Let me see if you would agree, right? Because I've thought about this. In the academy world, come on a Monday morning, let's assume there's 4 days of training and 1 day off and then a game. Let's say the following Saturday is St. Louis versus KC, if you're in the academy. On Monday, you're going into training where you know that there's maybe 2 people, you and another person, or maybe a third person, in which you guys are all kind of competing for the start. So you start the week off with, I have to have good training. I have to have good training because I want to start. And then if you don't get that, you're just hoping to get in. And then by game day, once you start, if you get the spot, you're really like, oh, I just got to, I need to do my part, right? Because you don't want to be subbed out. And I'm wondering where between Monday and Saturday's kickoff does that kid think about, man, I really want to win this weekend. I hope we kick their ass. Pardon my French. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Where's that? Whereas you guys, if you wake up on a Monday at SLU High and Thursday night you've got CBC at home, what are you thinking about on Monday?
Winning the game.
Crushing them, right?
One of my best friends was a backup center back, and even seeing him get in the game when, even if it's not like we're blowing out the team, it's still exciting to see him playing and getting what he deserves.
Yeah.
But definitely that aspect of winning, that's kind of, I wouldn't say my coach didn't care about individual performance, but he kind of didn't. He kind of cared about the result. Which, was good for us in the end, obviously.
Well, your coach is brilliant at that because I know your coach and kind of watched the team the last few years, and the lean into let's put together a good team, let's win, because lifting that trophy is the greatest feeling you guys will ever have. He nailed that. And I think that it's one of those things that, again, a kid that is built for the academy pathway has to have an internal fire that is unlike anybody else's. And I think you know the kids that are on that path. You know who has that. You've seen it. And it's kind of hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. College coaches, they're looking for the kids to know how to win. And that's the moral of the story for any parent that's like, oh my God, I got to have my kid in the academy. No, you need a kid that has the desire to win and can step on a field and do it. because coaches will notice that.
Yeah. Just kind of veering off that subject and kind of concluding our time together. What was it like to be interviewed? Normally, you're the one doing the interviewing. So kind of what's it like being on the other end?
Carson, I got to be honest, man. It's tough. It's like, when I'm in the car with my family, I'm the driver, and 1 in 20 trips, my wife's like, I want to drive, and I let her, and I sit in the passenger seat, and it's tough. But this is fun. I think you did a good job. Sometimes, and I didn't tell you this, but you had the questions ready. You texted me the questions in advance, and then you brought in a copy for me. Between you and I didn't look at them. And I did that on purpose because this isn't a news article. I'm not a politician. There's not like prepackaged answers that I'm only going to deal with. And I think for you as a podcaster, as an interviewer, as really as a human, as you meet people, the ability to be fluid is huge. So I think being interviewed, it's fun because I like not knowing what's next.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining me on the podcast.
Where do we find you?
You'll find me on the SLU Canvas course in Miss Cordia's class.
Well, I tell you what, we might need to do a double dip on this one. Ask your teacher if it's all right. We'll release this thing on Soccer Dad Pod and get you a little bit of love, if it's permissible. So
Awesome.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you.